Yeah, here we are back again in the seat.
In 2025.
2025. How was your holiday?
It was good. It was good to see family. How about you?
Always good to see family. Less happy to see the certain family members that like to try to start arguments around the dinners.
Well, you'll have that, yeah.
Yeah. There's always seems to be one that'll make an argument out of the weather if they have to, try to avoid the hot, the minefield conversation.
Sure.
But no, it was good, and now we're breathing the fresh, clean air of January.
Yep.
Uh,
Driving down the dirty, wet, snowy roads.
I'm trying to think more of the postcard side.
Okay.
See on the calendar.
Fair enough.
Supposed to be a clean slate in January.
Sure.
Everything's fresh and new.
Sure.
I'm trying to be optimistic here. You're dragging me down, Jeff. So what are we talking about today?
So we're talking about credit unions. So
That's cool.
the last 2 cents you had mentioned that you were a member of a local credit union. And we thought that, hey, maybe talking about the differences between a credit union and a bank might make a good 2 cents. So here we are.
And we'll let you be the judge as to whether this is a good 2 cents or not. But I think it is. I think this is a good idea. I think it's a good topic. I think there's a lot of questions about this.
I knew virtually nothing about credit unions before recording this. So
okay. So what did you assume a credit union was if you weren't really sure what they were?
I assumed it was like a financial country club. Like you paid your dues, you had special rates. It was like a members only type thing for a select group of people, and
they were all called Muffy and Buffy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Donald and so forth. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I don't think you're entirely wrong. I mean, there are members, right? You can't. There are some limitations to who can join credit unions, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But a credit union, I mean, really, I'd say probably the biggest difference between a bank and a credit union is that credit unions are not for profit, and banks are for profit entities. And that doesn't necessarily make one better than the other. I think a lot of people, when they hear for profit, they automatically think of, Potter from It's a Wonderful Life just sitting in his chair and scheming and trying to destroy the town. Like that's what every bank does.
No.
We're just out of the holidays, so that's fresh in my head. But really, I mean, just because you're for profit doesn't mean you're not good for the community or a good organization. But so that organizational structure is probably the biggest difference between the two.
And then another difference was that credit union has members, but a bank has customers.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess that's a good segue into why are they called members, whereas banks have customers, right? So there are membership requirements to be a member of a credit union, right? They are called members. So traditionally, credit unions, they're not open to everyone. In some cases, you need to live in a particular area. Sometimes your qualification is based on your occupation or belonging to a specific organization or association. So to your point, when you said that I'm a member of a credit union, that I mentioned that on a previous, I do have accounts at a local credit union called USCO, which is USSCO. We all just call it USCO, but it's USSCO.
That's our big one around here.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one around here. And they are the United States Steelworkers Company. So the credit union was established back in the mid-50s for the people that worked at the United States steel plant that was in town. So it was open to them and their family members, their immediate family members. And so my grandfather worked for U.S. Steel, so therefore my dad was a member, which meant that I got to be.
Oh, that was your in. Okay.
That was my in.
Okay.
Right. So, but to your point, you can't always just decide, well, I'm going to become a member of USCO. Like if you don't have that family connection or you don't have that steelworker connection, then you really can't get in.
Now, some of these credit unions are more relaxed on their membership requirements now, but
some of them are getting more relaxed because I think they want to make sure they can get customers.
Sure, yeah.
So they are relaxing some of that stuff. But I think that it helps to retain a sense of community, a sort of shared vision of where you want to go because you are a member of the credit union. You're part owner, theoretically, of the credit union.
Yeah.
You get a vote. Yeah, you get a vote on what happens, how the organization is around.
Yeah.
So you want to have a common sort of goal, I guess. Like if you're a bunch of steelworker families, chances are you have similar wants and needs as opposed to, say, a group of teacher families, right? Because teachers have their own credit union options, right? So yeah.
So it's like a family. Members kind of look after each other,
Sure. No, I mean, I think that there are times whenever, because it is a little more close knit, maybe if you're needing a little bit of a, well, we'll kind of like let you slide on this, that, or the other on in terms of like getting qualified for a loan or something like that. Sometimes they can be a little more lenient. They still have to be intelligent, right?
Yeah.
They can't give you a loan if they know you're not worthy. But when I was a kid, when I was getting my first car, I got my first car loan through the credit union, and my grandfather pledged his shares
Oh,
to
cool.
get me, so that I could get the loan.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so it was one of those things where as a 16-year-old kid with only a part-time job, chances are I would have had a more difficult time getting that car loan had it not been for my grandfather helping me out through the credit union.
Cool.
So there are advantages for sure, But, on the other side, when you're dealing with banks, I mean, as long as you're credit worthy, you can open an account at any bank.
Yeah. If you're not a bad customer at a different bank or you're doing something illegal or,
Yeah,
yeah.
true. I mean, you're right. I mean, if you don't have the proper identification or you're committing fraud or something like that, banks can deny you an account.
But so can a
Um,
credit
but
union.
but so can a credit union, right? So I think that's something to think about is that there are limitations to which credit unions you may or may not be able to join up with.
Yeah.
Whereas there are less of those kinds of limitations to what bank you decide you want to bank with.
Sure.
Right.
So you had mentioned that your grandfather offered up his shares.
Yeah.
So I did find in my own Google search that credit unions and banks have a little bit different lingo on certain accounts, like what banks call a savings account, a credit union would call a share account.
Yeah.
And what we would call a CD, they would call a share certificate. So just a little tidbit,
Yeah.
since you mentioned share.
No, you're right. I mean, that's a good point. So there is a
Terminology difference.
terminology
Yeah.
difference, right? But they're basically the same.
They act in the same way. Yeah.
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 So if you are, I went and looked this up though. According to the Credit Union National Association, which is different than another organization we'll talk about later, similar letters, but 99% of consumers are eligible to join at least one credit union. But you got to keep in mind that a lot of credit unions are designed to serve their local community. So you're probably not going to want to join a credit union that's not in your town.
Sometimes you can't. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
That's true.
Though I did learn also that once you are a member of a credit union, you are a member for life. So if you do move, then that you are still a member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I would assume, I don't know this because I've never closed my accounts, but I don't know what happens if you close your accounts, if you can reopen them or if but
Oh,
I just never let my accounts close. That's pretty much why I still have my accounts over there is because they're a sort of a secondary account for me. And I just try to keep them funded so that I'm still a member.
well, you cannot be a member of a credit union without what we call a savings account, but they call a share account.
Yeah.
So you couldn't even close that if you wanted to.
Well, if I didn't want to be a member.
If you didn't want to be a member anymore, yeah.
Yeah. So you said about terminology differences, but let's talk about a little bit about the services that credit unions have and banks have.
Okay.
So both the credit unions and banks have checking and savings accounts, loans, credit cards, investment vehicles for their members,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But you may find, I think, that some credit unions, especially smaller credit unions that only service a small area, they're not always going to be cutting edge on their technology,
No,
should we say?
no, because they're not for profit. So that's not their priority, I guess.
Yeah, and some
Yeah.
of that stuff's expensive.
Oh, yeah.
That infrastructure is expensive
For online banking and apps and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and plus, quite honestly, there's some skill involved in creating those things that I don't want to be disparaging, but if you only have a small team
Mhm.
running your credit union, maybe you don't have a person on your team that is dedicated to app development.
Yeah.
Right, because you're not for profit, you only have so much money to go around, so maybe that person isn't as high on your priority list to hire, right? Because
Right.
you need tellers and you need,
Right.
facilitators and administrators, and so maybe that type of person isn't the type of person you hire right away, if you don't have the money for it.
Yeah.
So things like ATMs too. A lot of banks, if you're banking with a national bank like Chase or Bank of America or something, there's an ATM pretty much in any big city that whenever you want to, if you want a surcharge-free ATM, a lot of your smaller credit unions are going to be limited to the ones around town unless you want to pay a surcharge.
They're getting better at having those shared ATM access, though.
Yeah, there are definitely shared sort of networks you can join.
Mhm.
I know the credit unions, they have a network called Co-op that allows you to share ATM access with other credit unions.
Star and Allpoint.
Yeah, and banks can sometimes, like community banks like
Yeah.
this, we can sometimes join those kinds of things too to give people a leg up
Mhm.
on trying to avoid surcharges and so forth, especially if you're traveling. Yeah, so we kind of talk about credit unions always being, we've been talking about credit unions as small, but they're not all small.
No, no. There's one really big one, though, the Navy Federal Credit Union
Yeah,
that has access of over $180 billion.
yeah, that's a lot of assets. I
That
mean,
is a lot of
180,
assets.
that's a big I keep wanting to call them a company. They're not a company, but that's a big credit union,
Yeah.
180 million in assets, and they have over 14 million members.
Wow.
But their commonality is, of course, the armed services.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to, contrary to what people will possibly tell you, you don't have to be a member of the Navy to join Navy Federal Credit Union. Like you can be in any of the armed services branches.
Okay. Or
Even-
or your relative, one of your relatives, yeah.
Yeah, or one of your relatives, right? Even the Coast Guard,
Even the Coast Guard.
Space Force. I'm certainly not disparaging any member that we appreciate everything the military does, but unfortunately, those two kind of get the, I don't know, they seem to always get the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So we've talked in the past about the FDIC and so forth. So does the credit unions have a similar
They do.
organization?
They have the NCUA, which is the National Credit Union Administration. And it works much the same way as the FDIC does.
Okay.
The Share Insurance Fund insures individual accounts at federally insured credit unions up to $250,000, just like the FDIC does. And a member's interest in all joint accounts combined is insured up to $250,000.
Okay. So if you and your wife both have an account, just like at a bank,
Right.
you and your wife both have an account, it's got $500,000 in it to make it easy.
That's insured if that credit union goes under somehow. Yeah.
Right. Because you're insured for $250,000 and she's insured for $250,000. So yeah. So just like the FDIC, and just like the FDIC, the NCUA does not insure money invested in stocks or bonds or mutual funds, anything that has a risk of, and that you're basically told, like, look, this could go up or this could go down.
Mhm.
We're not going to insure you for it because you're knowingly taking the risk that this is an investment that could, vacillate.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So there is a link in the description that we'll put there for both the FDIC and the NCUA that shows you what kinds of accounts they cover. So if
Yeah.
you're curious in seeing what kinds of accounts are covered by the FDIC or the NCUA, we'll put links in the description. You can take a look at those.
Cool.
So one of the other questions that I looked at was, are banks or credit unions more common in the U.S.? And turns out,
I would say banks. I see more banks, at least in this area, than credit unions.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would tend to think of the same thing. There are a couple more credit unions in the area, though.
Yeah, they're just not. Credit unions don't seem to be as advertised as much as banks do.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably true. Well, there's probably a reason. If you can't be a member,
It's an elite,
it's elite. Yes, we only advertise to the high and mighty.
Yeah.
But I mean, in all seriousness though, why waste money on advertising dollars if not everybody can take
Yeah.
advantage?
Most of it's probably word of mouth.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did look this up. As of last year, 2024, I can't believe that's last year now. The FDIC listed 4,577 banks in the United States, whereas there were 4,572 federally insured credit unions.
Wow.
So it's 5 difference.
That's insane. I wouldn't have thought that at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that at all either, to be honest. That's pretty crazy. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely out there. It's just, to your point, I think maybe they just don't get as much publicity.
Definitely.
So why else would I want to look at a credit union?
Well, I've heard they have better rates sometimes,
Mm.
lower fees,
Yeah.
because
they're
they're not for profit. Yeah.
So
So
they're not for profit.
whatever profit they do make, they kind of give back to their members with lower rates and better fees. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point, the dividends, like if they make too much profit. That's
right,
right.
that gets put into their what we call a savings account. They call a shared account.
Yeah. So I guess I think you're right. I mean, as a rule of thumb, because they're not for profit, they are known for having traditionally higher interest rates on things like deposits or lower fees or better rates on loans. I will say, when I've looked around, they're not always exponentially better. It's hard to do an apples to apples comparison because, again,
Because they're not. Right.
with a bank, you can rate shop around and you can say, well, this bank, bank A has a 4.25% interest rate on whatever CD. Bank B has a 4.5% interest rate on that same term. And you can just decide to go to bank B. But with a credit union, you may not be able to do that kind of rate shopping because maybe you can't be a member of the one that has the better rate.
Yeah.
So there's that limitation. But I guess if you are a member of that credit union, you can get a better rate, then that's great. I guess take advantage of that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so
But it's always important to do your research.
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, rates vary widely, all across the country, quite honestly, and sometimes even in your hometown based on a variety of factors. So if you're not familiar or comfortable making those decisions yourself, don't rely on me and Jeff. Find a qualified financial professional to help you decide where to put your money. Because as much as we are here to help, we are definitely not telling you where to put your money or what to do. We're just giving you the options.
Yeah.
Telling you the differences. And I guess the last part of this that we should probably talk about is that when you research this stuff online, you hear a lot about credit unions just being nicer or better for their communities.
Yeah, you
than
do hear that
banks.
a lot. Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess I'm making an assumption myself, but I would have to assume that they're talking about the difference between your local credit union that services a small town in Illinois,
Mhm.
and they're comparing that against one of these mega banks that covers the whole country or even internationally.
Probably.
And it does go to show, or it does follow that the small credit union in that one town would be more interested in the local food bank, for example,
Mhm.
than the mega bank would be interested in that particular food bank in that particular town. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
So you have to compare community bank to credit union pretty much.
and I think that's, you hit the nail right on the head. I think that, you forget about the community banks,
Mm.
right? Community banks like AmeriServ that truly do work only within our communities and want to help out that local organization, the Girl Scout troop, from your local school or the local church or
Mhm.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
So just because you're a bank and you're for profit, again, doesn't make you an evil entity.
No.
There are a lot of community banks like us that really do want to help our local communities. And so maybe that would be a more fair comparison, is to compare credit unions to community banks rather than comparing them to a megalithic ally bank that's online only or something like that.
Yeah.
So now do you have a better idea of what a credit union is?
I do, definitely. Am I going to join one? Who knows?
I don't know if you qualify.
I don't know if I qualify. Yeah, you're right.
We'll start our own podcasters credit union.
All right, Drew.
Thanks. Sloan each other $5 for lunch.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Drew.
Yep. This podcast focuses on having valuable conversations on various topics related to banking and financial health. The podcast is grounded in having open conversations with professionals and experts, with the goal of helping to take some of the mystery out of financial and related topics, as learning about financial products and services can help you make more informed financial decisions. Please keep in mind that the information contained within this podcast and any resources available for download from our website or other resources relating to bank chats is not intended and should not be understood or interpreted to be financial advice. The host, guests, and production staff of Bank Chats expressly recommend that you seek advice from a trusted financial professional before making financial decisions. The host of Bank Chats is not an attorney, accountant, or financial advisor, and the program is simply intended as one source of information. The podcast is not a substitute for a financial professional who is aware of the facts and circumstances of your individual situation. Thank you for listening. Please check out our full library of episodes, which can be found on the AmeriServ.com website. You can also download or stream the podcast from your favorite podcast app.